A very good day to all of you listeners out there, and welcome to episode 7 of this season. And we have Lyra here.
Yes.
Now, we mentioned earlier on already that in the Twitter file, there is also a substantial censorship of COVID discussion, which is what we want to do in this part. So maybe we want to show the next video now.
But the reality is, even this in May of June of 2020, I think you've continued to see people in these bureaucracies and in this establishment behave in ways that have totally squandered any type of confidence or goodwill that people would have. And our CDC at this point, anything they put out, you just assume at this point that it's not worth the paper that it's printed on. And so in Florida, we're creating what we're calling the Public Health Integrity Committee. It's a committee of expert researchers that will be able to assess recommendations and guidance related to public health and healthcare, but particularly being able to offer critical assessments of things that bureaucracies like the FDA, CDC, and NIH.
Now, this was the same meeting that we mentioned earlier on at the later part. Did you hear what he said, right? You know, anything released from the CDC is not even worth the paper they're printed on. and I mean, I was watching bits and pieces of that, and even the Twitter file where they talk about how the author of the Great Barrington Declarations have been censored. And this kind of bring me back to season 3, where we did a lot of episodes on COVID. We interviewed Dr. Roland, Victor also, and just talk about how, you know, there is so few dissenting voices, and maybe it is not that there are few. Maybe they are being censored. Maybe they are being silenced. So now let's talk about science, okay? So I mean today we are not doing science, but both of us are from science stream.
Yep.
And we know the basic of science, right? You have statements, you want to say this is a scientific fact, you have to be able to prove it. You have to be able to use experiment. So just off my head, you know, when I think about COVID and how so many things were just so unscientific, you know, starting from the Imperial College data saying that hundreds of millions of people would die, and then later they had to retract. Then later on, remember Lancet published an article comparing those vaccinated and unvaccinated. And then when asked to show the data, they couldn't, and they just retract. These are kind of warning light already, but people just kind of don't want to think for themselves. Then, of course, over a period of time, there's just this narrative coming out. So the Great Barrington Declaration, we talked about that, I think, in season 3. And this was one of the things mentioned in the Twitter file, right?
Yes.
How, now basically, just for the benefit of our listeners and viewers, the Great Barrington Declaration, they came out way, way early during the beginning of COVID, right at 2020. And they were arguing that, look, this disease is a very targeted disease. It will harm people who are above 50, 60, 70, but literally zero risk of super low risk to children. So that's why, now remember one of the things, just bring back so much memory of what we did in the past episode. One of the things we talk about in Malaysia is how they never talk about children's, the risk of children with vaccine. You know, they just kind of carry on until the vaccine for children is ready. Then all of a sudden, COVID is very dangerous for children. So if people have if people pay attention to the timing of the news cycle, then they will know that, look, this is all manipulation. But anyway, we want to come back again in terms of what DeSantis had said. You know, you have the FDA, you have the CDC, you have the NIH. Why should they monopolize scientific discussion? Because isn't scientific discussions a discussion, a debate?
Indeed. I mean, even just, I think over the last few episodes where we talk about the election results, we're just talking about the subject matter expert. I mean, do you want to have subject matter expert that governs, but you have zero experience in pandemic management?
Yep.
And these are the group of people that basically sets the tone for the economy, for the whole nation. I mean, it's just a bit ridiculous because you're only subject matter expert in one area. You're not subject matter expert in the rest of the area, which basically the whole population is part of.
Now, it's very interesting you mentioned subject matter expert, because the Great Barrington Declaration, they are experts in pandemic. But whereas you get a lot of doctors who come out, they are pediatricians, they are brain surgeons, they are whatever. They have no idea over how the pandemic works. So it's like, so it kind of remind me of what the interview we did with Dr. Roland Victor, and he said, look, every time someone come out and say that you should do this, you should take vaccine and things like that, go and check their credential. What is your qualification that allows you to say this? And after a while, people start to question that. Remember, the Ministry of Health and the vaccine department sort of just put a committee name. They don't even put the name out anymore because they know people are scrutinizing them. And yeah, I mean, like what we discussed in Malaysia, especially the Malay, they are really the ones that is awakening to the fact that there is some sort of conspiracy, whereas some other people, and don't need to mention who, and just kind of get caught in a whole mind control.
Right. I mean, you also just now you talk about the timeline. If people would just be careful to observe the timeline, they would have seen that CDC changed the definition of vaccination altogether. I mean, that happened only like earlier this year, February 2022, I believe. It's like after a whole year of pushing for vaccine, then suddenly, then people begin to see, how come the whole country is going through another cycle, another wave of coronavirus altogether again, and then you suddenly see a spike. I mean, you see a spike, and then suddenly there's this change of the vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, since we're in the season of World Cup, right? So remember some episode we said they kept changing the goalposts. Now, of course, when you kept changing the goalposts, there will be people like Dr. J. Bhattacharya, of the Great Barrington Declaration. You have people like Robert Malone, Kulldorff. These are the famous dissenter. By the way, they were all banned for Twitter for a while, and they all came back now.
Yep.
And when you keep changing the goalposts, remember we talk about how they say, we need to flatten the curve, then we need to stop infections, then we need to stop transmission. But your vaccine can't even do that.
Yeah.
And when you kept changing, people who are knowledgeable in this subject matter will come out and tell you off and say you're basically bullshitting. So the only way to stop them from being challenged is to ban them.
Indeed.
And that's what Twitter File has exposed. And we're just discussing before the recording how this kind of reminds me of the Roman Catholic Church when they were confronted with Galileo. And Galileo, of course, the scientist who invented telescope, he said, by the way, Earth is not the center of universe. Sun is. The Roman Catholic Church cannot accept that. So he was excommunicated. I think I can't remember if he was even killed. I think he was not killed, but he was basically kicked out from the church and the scientific community simply because they could not argue with him. They could not bring the evidence. So that's why now we come back to what Governor DeSantis said, because remember what Florida did. From the beginning, Florida kind of went against the whole grain. And people are able to go to fish, Disneyland remain open. And I remember the early data, and they just could not explain it, why Florida is still doing well in terms of death rate, in terms of nursing home crisis. It's not even as bad as California and New York, which are the two most famous or infamous states that advocate for lockdown.
Yeah, I mean, even at that time, there were a lot of studies about Sweden as well, because Sweden is also another country that didn't lock
They
down.
didn't stop school at all.
Yeah, I mean, all
At
the kids
all.
just continue on and on and on with the schooling, and yet they don't really see a lot of death rate among the kids.
And that's one of the things that really, it just kind of caused me to be a bit annoyed, because we know this is the risk factor, and yet so many parents, I mean, even a lot of people I know will be like, have you vaccinated your child? Have you vaccinated? So even, I think my children's, when they go to the school, I think they remain the only 2 or 3 or 4 who did not vaccinate at all. Because we know the risk, and when they got COVID, exactly right. After 1 or 2 days, they recover. The adults are still suffering from symptoms, but the children are up and running very quickly, because this was a targeted disease from day one. But the authority doesn't want us to know that. And especially when they're developing a vaccine. you need to sell, right? I mean, if people know that, they're not going to buy the vaccine. So now we are starting to see some sort of exposure, if I can use the word, some sort of implosion.
Yep.
That's why I remember we mentioned a few episodes ago, the Atlantic published a huge article and say we need COVID amnesty. Amnesty from what? From your stupidity. So that's the kind of thing that I think will implode, because the other thing that is happening right now, a lot of people don't realize, is that the insurance claims just shoot up all the way. So maybe you could reduce risk of death among certain category, but what about other risks from taking the vaccine?
Yeah, like vaccine injuries.
Yeah, and with mandate and things like that, you don't even give people the options. So a lot of people were forced. I remember those days in Malaysia, you can't even travel, you can't even fly. And I know a lot of older people, because they wanted to go home, they want to go to Sabah and Sarawak, they took the vaccine quite unwillingly. And of course, there are some people, they had some adverse effect. Then they say, okay, no more. But a lot of people will be like, just continue on, because it's just so easy to do that. And so Florida is a very good example, because Governor DeSantis opened out, allowed school, and very soon he said no need masking, and people just went crazy, their mind exploded. And I mean, I'm just putting some notes here, because Florida was one of the first states to make it unlawful for you to impose vaccine mandate.
Yep.
That means, you can say, you can encourage people to take vaccine, but you can't say if you don't take vaccine, you can't come to the building, you can't go to school. So one of the few famous cases, of course, will be the cruise ship.
Yep.
Because the Caribbean cruise, Miami is one of the major port for them. So they want to insist all the passenger vaccinated. So Florida said, okay, you want to do that? I'm going to fine you for every mandate you impose. Lo and behold, 1 or 2 weeks later, vaccine mandate is taken off cruise ship by the company. That means they have a choice. They know they have a choice.
Yep.
Then another very famous incident is a Special Olympic,
Yep.
also in Florida. And they were like, oh, everyone who come to see the Olympic need to be vaccinated. So DeSantis said, okay, I'm going to count how many potential visitors you have. I'm going to fine you 5,000 each. I think I can't remember the actual number, a few 100 million. Lo and behold, 1 week later, no need vaccine. So that's why Governor DeSantis, I think, he really provides the first model, I would say, around the world against this sort of totalitarian system. And that's why at the end of the round table, and he just have to do that, he say he's seeking Florida grand jury to investigate COVID vaccine wrongdoing. He's serious.
I mean, it's really amazing. I mean, you talk about the cruise ship, where he basically very, very early on, he already set the tone that he said CDC has no legal requirement at all to set any sort of requirement for all this cruise ship. It's like, what have you got to do with all these things? So it's quite phenomenal what he did there, the sort of model that he set, and yet when the whole other, like you talk about like New York City, they are the ones that really, really suffer from all this lockdown, vaccine mandates and stuff like that, and yet they still have the highest number of transmission. But contrast it with Florida, economy is just...
Yeah, interesting about New York, because at one stage it was so bad, the nursing home, a lot of death and things like that.
Yep.
I think those issues have not been brought to justice yet, and accounting has not been conducted. So I think it's going to implode really, really big time. And there's a lot of reports already that the insurance company are not happy at all, because they are paying out more money. So in fact, they are even saying that they are considering to sue certain vaccine manufacturer, because what you promise. Now, of course, every time you talk about efficacy, there's always plus and minus. You talk about polling, they'll say plus or minus 3 or 4 or 5%. But I think what they are seeing with the vaccine is that what you promised was so far off. It's 100%, 200% so far off. So I think we're going to see more fireworks in days to come. And I think the new Italian government has said they're going to do a COVID investigation also. So I think it's a good thing, and Now, the other thing, of course, about Governor DeSantis was that he won really, really, really big in midterm.
Yep.
So people are saying, you have done a great job. Our economy is strong. So I think those lockdown states just couldn't understand. So let me ask you this question. Do you think they knew and purposely still control people, or they are being, or maybe you want to give them some benefit of doubt and that it is possible they were misled by so-called experts like Anthony Fauci? Or it's a bit of both?
Personally, I'm more of a camp that there is a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can't entirely say that you are unaware of all this thing. I mean, you have a whole group of people. I mean, administrative state is a whole other topic altogether. But then you have all this group of people, a whole lot of subject matter expert, if you will, and you have the Pfizer, you have the Moderna. All these people are coming to you and they are selling you all this thing. And then when you have also CDC committees. So I don't think they are entirely innocent here. I think there's a lot of colluding. And then when you talk about function of gain.
Yeah, that's the thing that still needs to come to the bottom of the investigation.
Yeah, and all this funding comes from the government itself. So I personally don't think that they are completely innocent altogether. But they were just probably just envious of the kind of control that China has. But you also go back to like World Economic Forum. You have this whole group of people who are really, really into the globalist agenda.
Yep.
So suddenly there's that whole worldwide experiment platform for them to just basically experiment a totalitarian sort of model, tyranny. I think once they tasted a little bit of power over there, they are completely sold into this whole game altogether. So maybe they started off a little bit innocent because there were just a lot of crap research papers that came out. But then just after that, it's just a whole lot of snowballing, avalanche, and that just caused them to, okay, let's just do this worldwide. And then because you can't help but think that how come the media, the government, all the worldwide different governments, they are just talking about the same language. It's like take vaccine, wear a mask, double mask. So they must have some sort of, I don't know, like shadow committee behind the scene.
Yeah, and like what you say, they tasted the power, So if the emergency gives them this power, then they will only go ahead and create more emergencies. So that's what we are seeing and why we need to push back. Now we want to end with this because some of you may be wondering, how could Ron DeSantis do this? And it has to do with their system. And very early on in the Republic of America, there was this discussion, there was this huge debate. Should we be full-on federalism? That means the central government controls. But it was Thomas Jefferson who said no. We shouldn't allow that. So he fought for states' rights and they prevailed for the longest time. Now, of course, ever since FDR and Supreme Court, it has been eroding. But something like healthcare is actually under the purview of state. That's why DeSantis could do all these things. And if you watch his roundtable in full, he did mention, look, the Surgeon General of the state has power to convene a roundtable or committee that has power to even override CDC, FDA, and all those kind of things. And that is what they are doing right now. So kind of bring back to Malaysia, because we have been under centralization for so long. And now, of course, Sabah Sarawak have been asking for more rights. But we argue that, look, the rights should kind of apply to all the states.
Yep.
And, Sarawak is now saying we want autonomy in education and health. Then what about other states? They should have it too. But can you imagine if you're federal government and suddenly you have to give up power? We just say, right, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So people are not going to be willing. And that's one of the things, we're just having a discussion today, how, we look at the local government minister, Ngang Kwok Ming, right? And he said, I have 7 agenda I want to push for. And they were like, where's the local election? And then he quickly added, it will come later. But you can just imagine, right, for state government, local election is going to kind of shave away so much of their power. And somebody rightfully asked, in our discussion group, How come Selangor objected to local government elections in 2018?
Yep.
And even before that, and they were government for 10 years already. And I think the reality is they don't want to lose power. I'll say that to, we are Pakatan supporter, but I'll say that to the face of their leaders. You do not want to lose power.
Yep.
And this is where we are. So Ron DeSantis was able to do that because the state have this sort of right and it balanced off. So I think we are, the goal for Malaysia, I guess, is really decentralization.
Indeed.
But how would that look like? So in a way, the unity government is maybe the beginning of decentralization.
Yeah, I'm very, very hopeful. Just looking at the different portfolio that is being held by, all the various vested parties.
It's not a bad thing, It's really not a bad thing because you are forced to compromise.
Yep.
And even now, if, the next big thing they say they're going to do is to reduce subsidy. Now, they don't use the word reduce. They say selective subsidy. But basically, it's reduction.
Yep.
And I don't think you can do that if you have one winner takes all kind of structure. Even if you win 2/3, it will be super, super unpopular. But now it's up to all the coalition partners to come back and explain to their base why we cannot spend more money.
Yep.
So it's interesting, but I do encourage those of you, if you watch DeSantis clip, he is really an incredible governor, and it's about 1 hour, the round table. Go and read because there are many, go and watch it because so many experts, they really gave very scientific point of view, I would say. And these are not like small fish, these are elite, these are the top of the field kind of scientists. So you can't say a few thousand scientists are all stupid and don't know about the pandemic.
Yep.
If there is a discussion, it is because the science is not settled. But the big tech wants you and many people to think it is settled. But anyway, I just felt like what we discussed today kind of go back to the root of what this show is all about.
Yep.
So I think season 6, we want to unpack it. So just kind of, I know that there are a lot of things we didn't really explain in detail, but that's not the goal today. More like just to give a taste and introduction. So in season 6, when we come back, I think early next year, I think we're going to begin to unpack. So any other concluding point for you, Lyra, before we kind of sign off?
No, I think it's just that whole era. I think with the episode with Fauci earlier on, that talk about like a different sort of media. Because earlier on it was the internet that basically shaped the whole political game for Malaysia. Now you have all this media. So how do you go against all this? Because we have been talking about...
The social media now, right?
Yeah, the social media.
TikTok.
We have been talking about the populist move, the grassroots. How are this group of people, if you have the big tech colluding with the government, maybe there comes a time where the grassroots people will have someone, a prominent voice that will cause them to just... I wouldn't use the word rebel, but probably a revolution is coming. A reformation is coming.
Yeah, in a way, that's also what Elon Musk was trying to do, right? Whatever is his agenda and goal, he is opening up so that could be used as a weapon. Now, I just think about, when Twitter played a huge role in Arab Spring, and look at where they are now. They have become like the incumbent of those Arab government.
Yep.
And yeah, and one of the things about TikTok, this is my final comment already, is that why people go to TikTok now is because TikTok is basically unregulated at this stage. Unless you criticize CCP, you can do whatever you want on TikTok. Whereas YouTube, Twitter have all kind of algorithm and things like that. So yeah, maybe it's time for a new wineskin, a new paradigm.
Yep.
Now, remember we talked about App Store and things like that. It's just so hard. But I really feel like we are coming to an end of smartphone already. I've been you are an Apple user. I am an Android user for so many years. But honestly, if there's a good platform, I would ditch Google anytime. I'm quite prepared to do that. I think you are quite prepared to ditch Apple if there is a good enough platform.
Yep.
So I think we're at that stage, and maybe a new player will come out. You never know.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe in our lifetime. All right, so that's all the time we have for today. So we're ending season 5 now. So do join us back again, I think early January next year, right? All right, so that's it for now. Bye bye.
Bye bye.